Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Let me begin by offering you a word of counsel. Kind of a useless word of counsel, but counsel nonetheless. Do not get old. I will be 68 this month. I don't mind being 68. But when you get to my age, typically you aren't on a lot of meds, and I am. And my meds make me fall occasionally. Plus, I have osteoporosis. Those two things don't mesh very well. So do all you can. Find the fountain of youth and try to stay as young as you possibly can for as long as you can. Now, that was obviously a worthless introduction, but I thought I would begin on a kind of word of humor. And that's basically all that was. I don't care about my age. I really don't. Looking for sympathy. I'm happy I'm alive. What I wanted to discuss was the Ordo Templi Orientis. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. I would suggest it's more likely that you have heard of the guy who started it. His name, Aleister Crowley. He was a British ceremonial magician. He developed a system of magic, which for some unknown reason, he always spelled M-A-G-I-C-K. I guess he thought it looked nice. But he was an odd guy. He used to pride himself on being the beast, 666. For any of you who are familiar with evangelical or fundamentalist eschatology, 666 is the number of the beast, basically the number of Satan. And Crowley proudly called himself that. Now, did he believe it? I would say no. Crowley was a showman. He was a performer. He liked an audience, and he got one. People paid a lot of attention to him. Maybe they shouldn't have, because obviously, at least to me, when I read the stuff that he wrote, and when I'm aware of the things that he taught very well, and I will explain that in a second. Not literally a second, because a second has just gone by, but you get the point. Crowley basically thought of himself in very glorified terms as kind of a messianic figure. And he had some rather unusual people that he regarded as prophets. For example, Friedrich Nietzsche. He actually saw Nietzsche as a prophet, not a prophet of God, at least not God in the monotheistic sense. There are multiple gods in Crowley's system. The name for Crowley's system is Thelema. If you know any Greek, you know that Thelema is the Greek word for will. One of Crowley's most famous sayings was, "Do as thou wilt is the whole of the law." Now, exactly what he meant by that has been somewhat debated, but it appears as though he was talking about not simply doing what you want for the heck of it, but discovering one's true will. And I suppose that one discovers one's true will by engaging in ceremonial magical practices. And once one has discovered one's true will, one attempts to engage in activities which would promote that true will. Now, the Ordo Templi Orientis was one of two organizations run by Crowley. Crowley himself was not actually the founder of the Ordo Templi Orientis, but he did take it over and he did popularize it. The other organization, which he actually did start, was the AAA. There has been a lot of debate over what the AAA stands for, and I will not place myself into the middle of that debate, mostly because I don't care. Basically, thelemic magic, the generic term for the Ordo Templi Orientis and the AAA, is a kind of will magic, meaning that one can change the world around us if one wills it. If one wills it properly, if one engages in the right ceremonies. Now, as a sociologist of religion, which I'm happy to be, I chose that field myself and I love it. I studied the Ordo Templi Orientis. I actually became a member of an OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis group, back when I lived in Kansas. To my knowledge, and I've checked, that OTO group no longer exists. Why? I have no idea. As best I could tell, that group was growing. We were getting more and more members. I expected the group to go on indefinitely. But when I went to the OTO website and I checked a listing of the various OTO groups, including lodges and other groups by different names, I could not find any reference to the Kansas City group. So to the best of my knowledge, the Kansas City group no longer exists. I don't know why. I also have no desire to find out why, because it really does not interest me. Now, I left it. Did I ever believe in it? No. I'm not a superstitious guy. I don't believe in ceremonial magic. I joined the OTO to study it. That does not mean I was a spy. I was not. I join religions and I respect them. I always respected the OTO, irrespective of the fact that I did not agree with their teachings. For me, it is the job of a sociologist of religion to study a religion, not to debunk it. There are plenty of debunkers out there. We sociologists of religion should not join them. Sadly, some have, but I think that is rather sad. We should approach a religion as honestly, as fairly, as objectively as possible, which does not mean neutrally. Objectively means to look at all aspects of something from all angles and to try to understand it as best we can. Neutrally, on the other hand, means that we simply try to take an even-handed approach, kind of like the old motto of Fox News Channel, fair and balanced. You can't have fair and balanced in journalism. I know. My undergraduate degree was in journalism. You also can't have fair and balanced in religion. Inevitably, if you belong to a religion, you are not fair and balanced. Why should you be? You are a member of that religion. if you are a scholar like me who studied it, I also was not fair and balanced. I made no attempt to try to pretend that I favored the OTO. By the same token, I did not tell people in my chapter, for lack of a better term, of the OTO that I did not support them. I just went to their meetings, and their meetings were odd. Now, when I joined the OTO, I made a commitment not to reveal any of their secret rituals. And I have continued to abide by that promise till the present day, because I'm an honest person. Are their rituals anything to get excited about? No. Basically, OTO rituals were originally modeled on Freemasonic rituals. In fact, at first, OTO rituals and Masonic rituals were exactly the same. Freemasonry objected to Aleister Crowley. So what did Crowley do? Well, he made some slight modifications to the rituals, made some slight modifications to the passwords, to the handshakes, to the footsteps, different kinds of things that people do in the OTO. I won't say more than that, because if I did, I might be giving away, albeit unintentionally, some of the secrets that I pledged not to give away. But be assured, those secrets are nothing. They're nothing. They're literally no big deal. If you have ever joined Freemasonry, and if you have ever been through the Freemasonic rituals, you basically know what the OTO rituals are. They are only slight modifications of Freemasonic rituals. Now, have I ever been a Freemason? No. I never joined Freemasonry. But you don't need to join Freemasonry to know all about it. You don't need to join the OTO to know all about it. There are plenty of books which describe in detail the rituals, including the passwords, the footsteps, and the handshakes in detail. You don't need to join to learn that stuff. But I guess they try to make you think that you do, maybe. At least that was my impression. I got as far up in the OTO hierarchy that one could without being personally invited to go to a higher level. Now, why did I drop out? This is not a secret, so I'll tell it. I was attending my final initiation, which was 9 and 10. And the initiation was held in Oklahoma. So we drove down from the Kansas City area on the Kansas side to Oklahoma. I was upset because there were some people in that meeting who were, let's say, enjoying, I guess, illegal substances. They were taking drugs. They did not ask me. I was never discussed. It was never discussed with me. They never asked for my permission. And yet I was the main person there. I was the initiate. But I was never asked whether I was comfortable with it. And in fact, if they would have asked me, I would have literally demanded, and I have no problems demanding anything. Anybody who knows who knows me, will tell you that. I am a very assertive guy. Not aggressive in the sense that I'm not a violent man, but I am very assertive I will say exactly what is on my mind. And I would have said, no, please do not use those illegal drugs. Now, what those drugs were, I have no idea. They would go into another room and use them. I was very unhappy. If I had come down there in my own car, I would have left. That was before the initiation started. But sadly, I drove down with a group of people from the chapter in the Kansas City area, so I literally had no way to leave. As a college professor, at the time a working college professor, my concern was not being around people using drugs. I mean, I could care less, just like I could care less going into a bar, being around people who are drinking alcohol, although I personally do not drink alcohol. I am a teetotaler. But the fact is that the drugs that they were taking were illegal, whatever they were. And as a professor, say there was a police bust. There was not. I assume it's doubtful whether a police bust would have happened. But say there was one. The fact that I was there might have made me susceptible to being arrested. I don't know, but I think so. I mean, I was there. I was present. I was a part of the group. I suppose I could have told the judge, well, I was there, but I was not taking the drugs. Whether that would have mattered, I have no idea. But regardless, I made it all the way up to the 10th level of initiation. And again, I can tell you, it is no big deal. No big deal at all. You don't need to wonder what they are. If you're curious, Google it and you'll find out what they are. You'll find out all the secret passwords, handshakes, footsteps, same thing as with Freemasonry. And you will see the parallels between OTO rituals and Freemasonic rituals. There are a lot of them because originally they were the same until Freemasonry told him, no, you can't use these. Now, whether they had a right to say that, I don't know. I doubt whether the rituals were copyrighted. Probably not patented. I don't think you can patent a ritual, so I would guess copyrighted would be the correct term. I don't think that Freemasonry ever copyrighted its rituals, but nonetheless, Crowley was fine with it. I actually think he was pretty happy about it too, because it gave him the opportunity to explore his own creativity. He modified the rituals so it accorded more with his own particular philosophy, which again centers around thelema, upon the will. Everything in thelemic magic, whether in the Ordo Templi Orientis or in the AAA, centers around the will. The idea is that one can use one's willpower in a certain way and bring about changes in the world around us. Now, if that sounds odd, you're not alone. It is odd. It makes no sense. I will tell you some corollaries to that. If you are familiar with the Church of Satan, started by the late Anton von LaVey, he based his originally, I think, San Francisco-based Church of Satan on the OTO. The main thing was he simplified it. He simplified the rituals. Plus, he introduced the concept of Satan. And he took out, as far as I understand it, those other gods that were put in by Aleister Crowley. However, according to Anton LaVey, there was no Satan. Satan was simply a metaphor for the energies that we have in our bodies, and that we can use to bring about changes. In other words, Satan was a metaphor for Thelema. He just called it Satan. Why? Well, it appears to me that LaVey wanted to establish a kind of adversarial role with certain traditional forms of Christianity, which don't like Satan too much, and they actually believe that there is this satanic creature somewhere out there. But basically, the Church of Satan is simply a modification of the OTO, in case you didn't know that. When Gerald Gardner established Wicca, and yes, Wicca was established by Gerald Gardner, arguably with a few other people, but primarily Gerald Gardner, a British guy who grew up being spanked, literally. He was spanked at some kind of a school that he went to. It might have been a Roman Catholic school, but I'm not positive about that, so don't hold me to that. But I know he was beaten. At least he says he was, and I have no reason to believe he wasn't. That was a common practice at one time, especially in British boarding schools run under the auspices of a Roman Catholic order. So, Gerald Gardner, like LaVey, like Crowley, was a rather strange individual. He got most of his rituals from the OTO, but the rest of it came from other places. For example, his concept was of two gods. They are called by different names. I will use the more common names for them, but different trads, as they call them, or traditions in Wicca have different names for them. Diana and the Green Man. Diana is the goddess. The Green Man, who has horns, is the god. And no, it is not a coincidence that he has horns. It is based on the idea of the devil. But what happens with Gerald Gardner is he combined that with a couple of other things. One was, I guess you could call it, Druidic mythology. Now, no one really knows what the Druids actually believed or did. We have some indication. Leprechauns, for example, which were apparently accepted by Druids. But the practices of Druids were secret. And so they did not tell them to anybody else. They also apparently never wrote about them. So exactly what Druidism is remains largely, not entirely, but largely a mystery. But what Gardner did is he took his own, I guess you could call it a reconstruction of Druidism, and he incorporated it into Wicca, which is sometimes called witchcraft. And then he also added an aspect of a Hindu religion called Kashmiri Shaivism. If you've never heard of that, don't worry. I will tell you what it is briefly. Kashmiri Shaivism, like most branches of Shaivism, is a kind of esoteric branch of Hinduism. They believe in engaging in various magical practices. They believe in both Shiva and in Shakti. Shiva, the god, Shakti, the goddess. Okay, so there's an additional elaboration of the god and the goddess from Kashmiri Shaivism. And in Kashmiri Shaivism, the god and the goddess, Shiva and Shakti, are seen as being complementary. So, for example, in some branches of Kashmiri Shaivism, they are portrayed as husband and wife. In Wicca, the god and the goddess are not usually seen as spouses. Rather, they are seen as leaders, or I guess you could say vice regents, of a certain part of the year. So Diana, or Shakti, might cover half the year, and the green man, or Shiva, might cover the other half of the year. But Diana, or Shakti, was more important. In fact, there are some branches of Wicca, some trads of Wicca, and there are many trads of Wicca. Began with the the Gardnerian trad, then the Alexandrian trad. The Gardnerian trad conducts all of its rituals sky-clad. That means naked. Some branches of Alexandrian trad do, some do not. Now, here's the surprise. Maybe not a surprise. When I was living in Georgia, over 30 years ago, I developed a friendship with a fellow who I'm still good friends with. He's a really, really nice person. I really like him. We are Facebook friends. And I really admire him. I admire him tremendously. And I began literally to feel a part of Wicca, which is something I did not experience, for example, when I was in the OTO later on. But I did identify with Wicca, and this fellow knew it. I would attend all the meetings. I was really, really into it. I loved it. I loved Wicca. Now, that trad had a problem. We had a high priestess, whose name I don't remember, long time ago, who lived in Atlanta. We were in Macon, Georgia. And so she would drive down to Macon to conduct our rituals. I thought she was a nice woman. But after I left Macon and moved to Olathe, Kansas, which I felt kind of bad about because I really wanted to continue to be a part of that trad. I really liked it. It was one of the more enjoyable experiences of my life. I genuinely enjoyed going to those meetings, and I liked the people. Well, with maybe one or two exceptions, but there was one person who was very protective of her wolf, which I always thought of as a dog. And when I would pet the wolf, she once got angry at me and said that what I was doing was I was becoming bonded with the wolf. Maybe I have no idea if that's true, but so I never pet the wolf again. But I still thought of the wolf as a dog, because the wolf acted like a dog, kind of like a German Shepherd, maybe. But for the most part, I liked it. I really, really, really liked it. Especially the guy who was the head of it. I'll just mention his first name was Guy. I really liked Guy, and I still like Guy. Guy was a really nice guy, and he still is. I had and still have tremendous admiration for the man. Wicca was based on a couple of different things. One was Thelema, Aleister Crowley's Thelema, and another was many of the druidic kinds of things that they had adopted, combined with Kashmiri Shaivism. But the weird thing about Wicca, which most educated Wiccans that I found knew was a fable, the more uneducated ones did not. They called Wicca the old religion. That what that meant was that they believed that Wicca was the same religion which got women killed during the witch burnings in the UK and the US, in particular in the US, in Salem, Massachusetts. Is that true? No. The women who were killed in the witch burnings, they weren't Wiccans or witches. They were uppity women. And the husbands who got their wives reported, those women were perfectly innocent. They were simply, I guess, uppity or willing to talk back to their husbands. Yay, yay. They should be given all the praise in the world. But if the husband would turn a woman in, she was tried for being a witch. And it was a contradictory process. I mean, it was like the woman would lose either way. If she would float when they threw her into the water, she was a witch and she would be killed. If she would drown, she was not a witch, but too bad, she would drown anyway. So I'm happy I was not around at that time. Literally, that was a part of the Roman Catholic Inquisition, which conducted these witch burnings. A very sad period in Western history. There are some Wiccans who call themselves Dianic Wiccans who only worship Diana. They do not worship the horn god. There are other Wiccans, this may be dying out a bit, but they call themselves Xena Wiccans. If you are old enough to remember the TV show Xena, which was a spin-off from another TV show about Tarzan, Xena was an occasional character on Tarzan. That was a wonderful show. I loved Xena and her partner, whose name I can't remember, but it was a wonderful, truly wonderful show. And what it did is it showed two strong women, Xena and her friend. The confusing part of it was, which I mean, that's the screenwriter's prerogative, but Xena was not an Amazon woman. Her partner was, which made no sense to me. I mean, why wasn't Xena an Amazon woman? I don't know. But that's just the way the story was constructed. Xena was certainly the stronger of the two. Obviously, it was in a way kind of comedic. Xena and her partner would regularly beat men up. The two of them sometimes beating up these huge men, sometimes dozens of them at one time. So aside from its surrealistic nature, It was kind of stupid in a way, but it was fun. It was a fun show to watch. I was actually sad when the show ended, and there really has never been a show. I hope there would be, but there has never been a show which has lived up to the promise of Xena. Xena was really a one-time phenomenon, as best I know. Really a spectacular show. Hercules, so-so. I was not a big fan of Hercules. It was okay, but it was humdrum. Xena was not. And there was this undertone in Xena, never explicit, that there was a kind of romantic relationship between Xena and her partner. The romance was often shown in these kinds of dreamy scenes. So again, they tried to make it as, I guess, as vague as they could while making the implication clear. They were lovers. They were lesbian lovers. But they tried to keep that out of the show so that basically you had to guess. Did it take much guessing? Of course not. I mean, anybody with any degree of intelligence, even anybody without any degree of intelligence, could watch that show and figure out what it was. Okay, so regardless, I have talked about a couple of different things. Talked about Thelema, and I talked about Wicca, and I talked about the Church of Satan, right? Okay, so I guess that's 3 things. There are more. There are a lot more. I can tell you one thing that upset me, in addition to that drug thing at the OTO, was that I once had a conversation with a guy who was the head of our chapter. And he mentioned that the OTO headquarters were suing this other group for practicing OTO rituals. And I said, well, his first name was the same as mine, so I said, Mark, do you think that that's a good thing? And he said, absolutely. I was upset by that for a number of reasons. First, and perhaps most importantly, the present day OTO has no direct historical relationship with the OTO started by Aleister Crowley. It was a reinvention. There is no original OTO anymore. That's the most basic objection I have to it. Second, why would the OTO even care? I mean, if people are practicing rituals designed to make them develop thelema or will, why would it matter to them whether they were officially members of that main organization, which was actually called the Ordo Templi Orientis? I never could figure that out. I wonder sometimes whether that kind of fundamentalism that I observed, at least from that situation, is one of the reasons why that chapter no longer exists. I have no idea. Now, here's the trick. I am going to attempt to relate what I just said to Maoism-Third Worldism and to critical realism. You may be wondering, how in the hell is he going to do that? I will. It may not be that smooth, or at least not as smooth as some of my other podcasts, if you could call them smooth, but I'll do it. Let's start out with the critical realism of Roy Bhaskar. Demi-reality. splitting, disunity. That is the way in which Roy Bhaskar translated Maya, or illusion. If you look at the kinds of practices that were engaged in by these people, now I loved Wicca. I loved my Wiccan trad. But do I think that they were actually engaging in magic? No. That does not at all detract from my love of that trad. I genuinely love that trad. Till this day, and it's been decades later, I have tremendous love in my heart for them. I was not making any attempt to deceive them. I honestly liked it, and I liked them. I enjoyed being around them. It was one of the highlights of my week or month, going to their coven meetings. It was a real, genuine pleasure for me. But could they really affect changes through their spells? Same thing with the OTO or the Church of Satan. Could they really affect changes through their spells? Of course not. Of course not. If they thought they could, well, that kind of comes close to the New Thought music, the New Thought movement, which was an offshoot of Christian Science. The three major branches of New Thought are religious science, which is now divided into a couple of different organizations. Unity, which was previously called the Unity School of Christianity, and divine science, which is probably the smallest of the three. But what they believe is that there is a universal mind. In academic terms, that would be called objective ontological idealism, meaning that they believe that there is an objective, real source of thought or ideas, an objective mind which controlled everything in the universe. That all of our individual minds are simply parts of the universal mind, not separate, but simply parts. That is pretty close to the Hindu concept of Advaita, or non-dualism. Pretty close to that. And I would suspect, I can't prove it, but I would suspect that New Thought and Christian Science as well got that idea from Advaita, or perhaps from New England Transcendentalism, which had a kind of ongoing dialogue with Advaitism. But regardless, no, obviously they're not going to bring about changes in the universe. That's kind of a silly thing to imagine. Same thing with Satanism. Same thing with the OTO. So the fact that they, or at least some of them, believed that they could cast spells and bring about changes is, to me, an example of demi-reality, splitting, disunity, or illusion. So there you go. I actually did it with critical realism. Now, let's move to the Ordo Templi Orientis. What should be noted about all three of those movements? Again, I'll mention them: the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Church of Satan, and Wicca. By the way, each of them has since divided into numerous, often conflicting organizations. But again, to go back to the genesis of all three of those movements, they all began in the first world. And I think what they can tell us is a lot about the first world. A lot about why the first world has not been as successful as you would think it should be, considering all the money, all the power, all the military strength possessed by the first world, especially by the United States. If you have people believing that they can literally change reality through spells, basically through their minds, which is New Thought. That's what New Thought is. That's a pretty serious problem. And so I think what that does is it exposes one of the major reasons why the first world has not been as successful as it might have been otherwise. Not to say it would have been successful without those movements, but at least Wicca, Thelema, and the Church of Satan, with all of its various factions, all of their various factions, I should say, show that there's a lack of clear, rational thinking among these people. One thing I noticed as a sociology professor is that most of my students did not know how to think critically. At one time, in my social problems classes, I would spend the first few days going over critical thinking and common logical fallacies committed by people who are poor critical thinkers. I eventually stopped doing that, not because I thought it was a bad idea, but because I realized it wasn't working. My objective was to get my students to think clearly so that when they were reading the articles in the anthology or reader that we used, which was called Race, Class, and Gender, that they would be able to adopt a critical attitude, a skeptical attitude to the things that they were reading, to be able to analyze them, critique them, consider the points that are being made by the writer, to look at the introduction, the premises supporting the introduction, and the conclusion. That almost never happened. And that is literally what turned me off to talking about logical fallacies and talking about critical thinking, even though I believed in it, and I still believe in it. Not only do I believe in it, but I practice it. I am a very critical thinker. I've got to be careful with it, because if you do it too much and too explicitly, it can really get on people's nerves. Why? Because most people don't know how to think critically. Most people base their arguments on logical fallacies. And they think that they are making legitimate arguments, whereas in reality, they are simply making fools out of themselves. And they literally don't know that they are doing it. So, I would hope that if and when communist revolution or revolutions begin in the third world, and possibly, I say possibly because I'm not a prophet, obviously, as I've said too many times, perhaps eventually in the first world as well, that we will learn to think more critically about the things we observe. We will learn to be critical, especially of capitalism, especially of the first world, especially of imperialism, colonialism, and cultural hegemony, because that type of critique in 2024 is, for the most part, nowhere to be found. For now, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.